Hello and welcome. I'm Andrea Sankey, and we're at the Women Deliver Conference in Copenhagen, where thousands of people have gathered to discuss how to improve the lives of women and girls worldwide. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the United Nations in September of 2015 as a response to key challenges facing the globe. But from a practical perspective, how achievable are those goals? Well, in the studio, I have with me Dr. David Nabarro, a medical doctor with 30 years experience from around the world and now a UN Special Advisor on SDGs. And Sarah Hendriks, Director of Gender Equality at the Gates Foundation and a lifelong committed advocate of women's rights. Thanks both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The SDGs really describe a utopia. No poverty, no hunger. David, are they practically achievable?
So we've seen with the last round of development goals, the Millennium Development Goals, that were pursued between 2000 and 2015, that if we come together as a world around issues like poverty and hunger, that actually enormous achievements can be found. And what we now need to understand is that it's not so much are they achievable, it's whether or not we will organize ourselves to achieve them. And that's the focus from now on.
Because the responsibility to achieve those goals falls on individual leaders. How can we have confidence in the individual leaders to actually do?
But the responsibility falls on the world. You know, if you look at this 2015 agenda that was set up last September, it's actually been agreed by all world leaders. And it's a manifesto, a political manifesto for everybody in the world, for governments, but also for businesses, civil society, faith groups, academics. We've all got to work on this. There's no other plan for the world. There's no plan B. There's no other planet, which we've currently got a few problems with. So we all have to pull together to work on it. And that's how we see it. It's for everybody, not just for governments on their own.
Sarah, is there enough focus on gender equality and women's empowerment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the MDG certainly had a focus on gender equality, but we've seen this expand enormously in the SDGs. So we have a whole goal just focused on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. But that's not all. Women and girls show up across the 17 goals in the SDGs, and this has been the result of significant advocacy and lobbying by women's groups around the world. For one of the first times, government leaders have agreed not just to address the symptoms of inequality, but actually to drive a stake through the causes, the underlying drivers of inequality. And to me, that's pretty profound.
But Sarah, you've said that changes for gender equality and female empowerment have actually been moving too slowly. So if you held the magic wand right now, what would you do to move that progress at a faster pace?
Well, you know, I work at the Gates Foundation, and we like to call ourselves impatient optimists. And so I hear you when you say that progress is moving too slowly. What we've got our eye on as critical to advancing progress is looking at gender data. Understanding that we can't close the gender gap if we don't first close the gender data gap. Gender data matters so much. It gives us power to take what is invisible in women's lives and make it visible. Women and girls whose lives are often undervalued and uncounted in the world, gender data holds the power to be able to bring the realities, the issues that matter most to women and girls, like how they spend their time, whether or not they're safe, whether or not they have access to assets like land or bank accounts, and to make those inequities real and visible and counted.
David, if you held the magic wand.
Well, certainly I would want the whole of this new sustainable development agenda to be feminized top to bottom. Yeah. Because unless it's implemented in a way that is seen through the eyes of women, through the hearts of women, through the souls of women, it won't work. And that's because we've got plenty of evidence that when it comes to dealing with complex, multifaceted issues, that women tend to do better, certainly if they're part of the decision-making process, and also if they are part of the implementation. So they've got to be the subjects as well as the objects of the Sustainable Development Revolution. And I believe that we have a pretty good chance of making it happen, because more and more men are realizing that if they don't engage women in this process, it doesn't work. Look at government in Canada or a government in Sweden, where we have much greater participation of women, and you can see the results virtually in front of your eyes.
Well, let me play the cynic here then. We know that the SDGs are the successor to the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. Now, 2005 was supposed to be the year that gender equality and women's empowerment were achieved, or at least had dramatically improved. Too many people say that did not happen. The reality on the ground, life was not better for women by that year, by that 2005 date. Why are we so convinced the SDG goals will be different this time?
So first of all, I think being cynical is a very good thing when it comes to declarations by governments about development. What we have at the moment is some pretty urgent issues to deal with. We have quite a lot of wars, and we have more than 130 million refugees in the world that have to be addressed. We have climate change affecting the world in such a way that within the next few years, the number of adverse weather events and climate migrants are going to increase dramatically. We also are seeing fairly clearly that unless we work together and link peace, human rights and development, we're not going to be able to hold the world into a good place. It is my understanding from listening to heads of government and watching how their representatives work and seeing how civil society is emerging as a force for change throughout the world, that we're much more likely now to see a big shift in the way in which development is addressed than we were, say, in 2005, as you just referred to. I'm not prepared myself to cloud my own capacity to advance this work with cynicism or skepticism, basically because I know that we have no alternative, and that is the key.
I think also when you look at what did change over those 15 years of the MDGs, what changed for women and girls were positive things that were actually being measured. So we were measuring how many girls get into primary education, and we saw more girls attending primary school than ever before in all of human history. We were measuring how many women are participating in politics, in governance, and we saw advancements in this area. Why I'm passionate about gender data and getting more information on women and girls' lives is so that we can actually drive progress on all the areas of women and girls' lives, on how they're spending their time, on whether or not they have access to land,
right,
and so on and so forth.
There's another, if I can call it, sort of logistic issue with what we're trying to achieve here, and that is that there are so many organizations working to improve the lives of women and girls, both in the private sector and in the public sector, and all too often they are not coordinating their efforts, which means there is duplication and overlapping of work, which means funds and efforts and energy are wasted. How can we do a better job at coordinating those efforts so that it is more effective?
You know, I hear what you're saying in terms of the absence of coordination. I think the fragmentation of actors, whether it's in UN agencies or across women's organizations in the global south, or it's bilateral development agencies, this can be an issue. If you look around here at the Women Deliver Conference, however, I think it's an exemplar of people coming together across geographies, across institutions, and agreeing on a common agenda. And the SDGs provide that not only political impetus, but also the momentum, the spotlight, the leadership on a united, joint agenda for change in the world like never before. I think far be it from us, whether we're a political leader or a woman in a country, to ignore that agenda and to ignore this opportunity in this moment in time. To me, it gives great optimism.
And I think we've got really skilled at coordination in the last few years. We tend, when we see it come to a conference like this, to see lots of different organizations and imagine that there is fragmentation or duplication. But actually there's some very sophisticated coordination mechanisms emerging. We know much more about how to create magnetic fields within which people work effectively together without losing their sovereignty. We know much better about how to set targets towards which everybody can go, which is why the SDGs and their 169 targets are so important. And we know about the structures that need to be put in place to lead to continuous improvement in coordination settings. We have the movement for scaling up nutrition. We have Every Woman, Every Child as a global strategy that brings everybody together. And probably about another 50 similar mechanisms. They work actually remarkably well. And when I'm traveling and work at community level, I see the results of this really starting to come through.
I'm going to ask you something that's not quite your area of expertise, but so important nonetheless. What about the youth in this equation? How do you make the young people, the bulk of so many countries' populations now, understand and care about these goals?
You know, young people, both boys and girls, adolescents as well as young adults, matter so much to the success of the SDGs. We've seen in many countries that the population periods are actually quite significantly focused on young people, comprising the majority of populations. Young people's voices matter. Right here at Women Deliver, we've got over 500 young people from all across the world participating in high-level panels, in group dialogue, discussing together what the SDGs mean to them and how they're part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I think it requires organization and institutions to actually create and facilitate the amplification of young people's voices, to value them, so that they matter, to put them at the center of development decision making. At the Gates Foundation, I'm really excited about some programs that we have doing just that. One called Adolescent 360 takes a really innovative approach to programming on family planning, and puts adolescent girls between the ages of 15 and 19 in the driver's seat on designing what will this program be? How will it operate? How will it run? What difference will it make to my life? This is a whole new way of doing development.
Can I just make a quick comment on this?
Go ahead.
If you don't mind. Actually, I find young people, adolescents everywhere really do care, particularly what the world will be like for them when they're older and for their children and their children's children. And they tend to turn around to me when I say, are you interested in this stuff? With a very simple question. Do you mean to tell me that nobody has done this before? Do you mean to tell me there wasn't a plan for the future of the world before 2015? And I say, well, actually there wasn't. And do you know, they are really mad. And what I hope is that within 5-10 years, we will be forgiven by young people for our failure to actually do this job properly, because we'll show that we are doing it now.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a very quick statement from both of you on just a wrap-up question, and I'm going to play the cynic to wrap it all up. Too many critics have said that ultimately such ambitious goals are unattainable, and that the UN has wasted time and resources on printing material, organizing talk shops around something that really just can't be achieved. What do you say to those critics in one sentence to convince them that this is worth it?
This is worth it because it counts and it matters. When we drive change in women and girls' lives, it will actually demonstrate to decrease poverty, to increase economic growth, and to change the reality for men, for women, for boys, for girls everywhere.
It was the leaders and governments of the world's nations that set up these goals, not the United Nations. We just supported them. This is owned by the leaders of the world and by their people, and that's why we're dealing with it.
Okay. David and Sarah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Thanks
Hendriks.
to our viewers as well for joining us at Women Deliver. Please stay tuned for more great programs. And remember, you can always follow our hashtag WDLive and watch us online. Thanks.